Wow. No, I actually, Dr. Young, you did a phenomenal job. You covered so many points that are so important. I really want to thank you for making us think about it. And I'm going to go 180 degrees out. I'm not going to talk about specifics. I'm not going to talk about initiatives. What I'm going to talk about is what we discovered through a project. My friend and I, Paul Corney, interviewed 19 project managers for KM around the world who have stellar programs. I'm going to share with you what we found. The agenda, I'm going to go through, they always say, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them, right? Isn't that what they tell you to? Okay, so this is what I'm going to tell you. I'm not going to insult you. You can all read, can't you? Yeah? Okay, so who wrote this book? Why did I do this? Sometimes I still ask myself that question. I am not an HR person. I'm not an admin person. I'm a degreed nuclear engineer. I have my professional engineering license in mechanical engineering. I like to fix things. That's, I think, where we have a lot in common, being a knowledge manager. My colleague is totally different. He's a business entrepreneur type. And the one thing that we both had in common was that we wanted to make life better. We kept seeing people making the same mistakes over and over again. It's not just the Navy. It's not just America. It's everybody. I mean, you go to your doctor, right? You go from one doctor to another. Have you ever done that? And yet they ask the same questions. Why can't they share the knowledge? You don't have to go through the same thing over and over again. I was in the ER last week. I just had a blood work done the week before. They had to do blood work again. Why can't they share that? You know, it's just, I don't like any stuck. I mean, some people do. I don't particularly like to do that. Don't like vampires. And I'm doing this to keep myself on track because I could talk for days. Okay, so how did we decide who we were going to talk to? I mean, I could talk to Joe Schmo, and Joe Schmo might have a KM program, but who says Joe Schmo knows anything about anything, right? Well, we had criteria. Can you read this in the back? No? No? You're not in the back.
I should tell you something.
Well, you know, sue me. Would you like me to stop and leave? No. Okay, the bottom line is we wanted people who had actually built a program. We didn't want a bunch of consultants. I'm sorry, I apologize to all the consultants in the room, and there are a lot. We wanted people who had actually built a program, who had lived it for at least 3 years, people who had been responsible. The buck stopped with them. If something went wrong, they got called into the CEO's office or the whoever. In my case, it was the E1 office because I worked for the federal government. I wanted them to have a clear return on investment. It didn't have to be monetary, but they had to be able to articulate it. I don't want to say, well, we did really well. How do you know you did really well? Did your time to produce something, did that go down? Did the cost to produce something go down? What? So, and then where did we find these people? Well, Paul and I have been doing, well, Paul had been doing KM for 20 years. I'd only been doing it for about maybe 10. So I'm a relatively young KMer. But we did know some people, and some of these people, maybe you know some of them, maybe you don't. But those are the people that we asked, who would you go to talk about a really good KM program? And we found some pretty interesting places. Now, if you look at this list, and I put the logos up because some people don't like to read, so people are visual. It's pretty diverse. We've got some government, both in this country and not in this country, UK and Canada, notably. Some engineering consultants, petroleum manufacturers, and Airbus. That was a very interesting interview. They were all actually very interesting. And I did all the interviews because as a trained inspector for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, I went through this wonderful program that teaches you how to pull information out of people. And they don't even know they're telling you. Nasty. And then how do you find a publisher? Well, I was lucky. The American Society for Quality had just published something on knowledge management, and I approached them. No, I was not a member. I just have a lot of chutzpah, and it was in the same town as where my grandmother was, so I went to see Grandma, and I walked into ASQ and said, I've got this great idea for a book. And they said, okay. I'm still reeling from the shock of that. But so, after we interviewed these 19 people from all over the world, what did we find? Were there any commonalities? What would you think? Would there be any commonalities from successful CAM programs? Yeah? Yeah? No? Yeah? Okay. So what did we find? These were the 4 basic drivers why these companies created a CAM program. They are in rank order. Most of them said it was some kind of a risk, whether it was an economic risk, a judicial risk, a political risk, a whatever risk. It was a risk of some kind, either real or anticipated. In the case of Sellafield, and they're a nuclear processing facility in the UK, the government decided that they were going to cut the government budget, and I know none of you know anything about that. So Sellafield was told that they were going to let everybody who had more than 10 years of experience, if they wanted to leave within 3 months. How many people do you think took that? With a full pension, by the way. Oh, yeah, like there's 6,000 people there, 3,000 people said, I'm gone. Can you imagine the amount of knowledge loss? You want to talk about singularities and experts? There were people who have been doing that stuff for 30 years, and they're going to walk out the door, and the person who's coming in the door, I don't even know where to begin. Is all this stuff written down? We didn't do that back then, did we? No, we had that apprentice thing. You know, you came and you worked for 30 years and somebody came in and worked with you, and then they worked with you for 5 or 10 years, and then they knew something, and then you could leave, and then, that apprentice thing. Yeah. The second most important reason was the desire to improve operations. That was notably places like the port of Antwerp, where, I know, Antwerp, where's Antwerp? Where they wanted to increase the number of ships coming through the port because it made more money for the port. Okay, so they wanted to get streamlined things so you can offload and onload stuff faster. Leader vision and innovation. I was surprised that there were 3 or 4 companies that really wanted to make things better. Now those guys were generally consulting firms. That's actually should not be a surprise, because you want to be faster than the next guy. You want to be better than the next guy. You want to be more competitive. And then the 4th reason was regulations or directions from above. Anybody who was related to the United Nations got an edict that said, you will do better with sharing your knowledge, particularly in the Latin American countries. And is Denise in here? Denise is not in here. Okay. All right. So when we asked them, or when I asked them, how did you start? This is what they said. The first thing you got to do is you have to identify and understand your stakeholders. And you cannot read this, right at the bottom? No, you can't read it. It says, what if? And I know this sounds kooky, but what if we communicated with the employees? You got to understand your stakeholders. It is so important. If you design a CAM program out of your head, it's not going to help anybody. The CAM program is not for you. It's not for me. It's for the people who do the work. And who are they? They are not you. So you need to figure out what it is that they need. How can you help them do their job better? How can you make them happier? Because what happens? A happier employee does what? You got it. And that also shows up in the bottom line, which is something that Zach said earlier. You've got to think about the financial aspect. How can KM help you? Not just make you feel good, or make Bill feel good, or Tara feel good, or whomever feel good, but everybody feel good and make more money for the company. Okay? Don't assume that you understand. Listen to them. Sometimes when you ask people a question, they're not going to tell you right up front. You're going to have to tease it out of them, because they want to tell you what they think you want to hear, so you'll leave them alone. Oh, come on, you guys go through this, right? When somebody asks you a survey, you know how to answer those questions, right? So you have to tease it out of them. Once you figure out what their problems are, they tell you what their pain points are. Gather them up, list them out. And something else, and I can't remember who said it. I think it might have been you. That said, you've got to really pay attention to middle management, because those people can torpedo you. They can make the people above them think that things are bad, And they can tell the people who work for them not to do whatever it is you want them to do. So they can really torpedo you, damage you, blow up the program. They can sabotage you and you don't even know why the program failed. So you've got to work with middle management. You've got to figure out what would make your life better. They get squeezed from the top and the bottom. These guys, people, is guys gender neutral? No? These people are very put upon. I know I've been there, and some of you probably have been, but pay attention to the middle managers. It is well worth your while to do that. And you've got to answer for every person from the top all the way to the bottom with him. Do we know what with him is? Does somebody not know what with him is? What's in it for me? Yeah, that's a generational thing. we won't go into that. Okay. So the next thing, you're going to have to explain to your management if you did anything that made a difference. You're going to have to create a baseline and metrics. Guess what? You get to create that. You can call it whatever you want. In my case, it was the time to competency for new engineers, which I could actually monetize because we charge people for every hour that we spend on their programs, so I could actually put a dollar amount to it. I don't know what you can do, but I'm sure you are creative. You'll figure it out. How long does it take to do something? Where are the bottlenecks? How many supplies are you going through? Figure it out. And I'm sorry, did I not, did you see the last cartoon? Could you read it? No, I'm looking at this person who can't read. Okay. This guy is standing on the corner, and he has and says big issue. This person has a bigger piece of paper and it says huge issue. Okay? Okay. So the next cartoon, it's a bunch of bears and a human sitting at a conference table in the woods, and it says, "We are communicating better, but we are still not out of the woods." This is kind of losing something for you. I can tell you're not laughing. Everybody else is. Okay. All right, so you're really going to struggle with this next one. It's not all good news. We've been listening to so many initiatives and things about things you can do to make your KM program better, and how you try this and try that and whatnot. But you know what? Even the best KM programs, if not supported well, will die and fail. I had a KM program at the NRC. I saved them $60 million in operating costs in the first 2 years. I got Lyme disease. I forgot to tell you. I was the only dedicated KM person at the NRC. I had no staff, and I had no budget. And I saved them $60 million in operating costs. You want to know how? We can talk about that later. I don't want to take up the time. But it can be done. So you people who have staffs, I have no sympathy. Well, I should have sympathy, but I don't have a lot of sympathy for it. Okay, so why do these programs fail? Well, you know, when I got Lyme disease, I said to my boss, "We got to find somebody to pick up my stuff because I'm really not well." And he said to me, and I kid you not, "We don't need anything. KM is running itself." It's running itself because it was doing such a great job. But nobody was doing the phone calls. Nobody was saying, "How are you doing?" You know, the nurturing, the feed and caring of the people who are doing it. There were no more success stories. I couldn't tell anybody about how, you know, we saved 3 months on the analysis of this particular technical issue because we were sharing information. Those stories got stale. And I'm not going to read you the whole cartoon, I'm sorry. What?
Did you find any factor common with respect to knowledge management or learning or something associated with it was part of the strategic plan of the organization?
I don't understand what you're asking me. Here, wait. Go into the mic so everybody can hear.
So what I'm saying is, was there any opportunity where the organization had their knowledge management strategy, if they had one, anchored in the overall strategy of the organization? Or said another way, was the strategic plan of the organization, did it have an objective and a set of tasks associated with knowledge management or learning and things like that?
In general or for the ones that failed?
In general.
Yes, for most of them. Not all of them, but most of them. But it wasn't always at the very tip-top level. Often for like ARUP, which is an international organization, they would have their Americas, and then they would have Europe, and then they would have Africa. And at those levels, they would have a strategic document that talked about KM, but the overarching thing didn't go into as much detail. They would mandate that they would have a KM strategy, but not how. The how was left to the individual offices.
The ones that failed, they didn't have them, right?
The ones that failed, NRC, we had a SECI paper, a policy paper, which we published, which you can find. It's SECI 060164. It was published in 2006. It's available publicly, for what that's worth. BP did not. HP, it started as compact, then it went to digital, then it went to HP, so I don't know through all those iterations there was a strategic document for all of those organizations. So I'm sorry that I can't be more specific. That's the best I can do. So what kills KM? Well, it's usually change in management, where the new manager doesn't understand the value, where the KM was running itself, where somebody comes in and they have a new vision. That doesn't happen in this town at ever, right? We're always the same. They had a new vision. We're going to make more widgets because you've done such a good job in the past. Do they look at why you've done such a good job in the past? No. They just look at, oh, well, we need to cut costs. They don't look at what has streamlined the operations that you've had. And if you, in the book, which is, you can't keep it, there's story after story, because I love stories. People learn from stories, you're absolutely right. Managers don't get it, particularly in mergers. When British Petroleum was doing a phenomenal KM program, they got a new exec VP and he said, I don't understand this, there's no profit making here, and he slashed the budget from $2 million to $0 in a month. That was a shock. And obviously the KM program died. So it's usually that the managers or the people, the champions, don't get it. They don't understand what knowledge management has done and what it can do. Partly that's our fault, because we need to be telling everybody what we do and why it's important, and saying, look, I saved you $60 million in the last 2 years. Why don't you give me another 6 months and let me see what else I can do for you? I don't need any more money. Well, I didn't need any more money. But I love Dilbert. He makes me laugh. So one of the things that we learned from interviewing these 19, am I talking too fast? No? Okay. What we learned, how am I doing on time?
You're doing great. You got plenty of time.
Okay. We learned some things that were interesting. When you talk to 19 people on 5 continents about KM in very diverse industries, there's some interesting things that come up that Paul and I noticed that was really surprising. We actually had 10 surprises. I'm not going to go through all 10 because I'm not quite, but I'm almost the last thing standing between you and a cocktail. Excuse me, an adult beverage. So, but I'd like to share a few of those things with you, she said. Now, I was talking to somebody at lunch, and they said, yeah, knowledge is not considered an asset. People are, but not knowledge. At NRC, we conducted an experiment. I said, we've been doing the same thing since 1974, and we're starting to see new nuclear plant designs come through. We're starting to see new submarine designs come through, because we review that kind of stuff. And we're definitely seeing new designs for nuclear-powered rockets. Oh, you guys don't know about that. You guys don't know about that. Anyway, I asked the managers to look at their organization and identify their most critical knowledge asset. And the eyes glaze over. Totally, yeah, you're nodding like, huh, what? Okay, work with me for a second, okay? Work with me for a second. Yeah, I'm staring right at you. You know your work group, right? You know it pretty well?
actually working for, yeah.
Okay. Do you know, if I were to come to you and take the two most important people out of your work group, do you know who those two people would be? Okay. Why are they the two most important people?
Because the people get things done, and know how things are getting done.
Ah, okay. So now you've just told me you've identified some knowledge assets. Two of them. And you can give me a name, and you can tell me why. Should we or should we not encourage those people to not leave?
Seemed like a good idea, yes.
We did this exercise all across the agency. It didn't take very long, because how long does it take for you to figure out who the two most important people are that you work with? I mean, it's like, right? You know exactly who they are. And then if you ask why, you know that too. Fine. So we took that, we put it in a matrix. And every year during performance appraisal time, we would ask every manager to go through and say, is it the same people and is it the same reason? And then you cross-reference that, you go to HR and you say, okay, when can these people retire? Now you got an actionable thing. You can check with them, you can ask them, are you happy? Is there something we can do? You're thinking about retiring? Well, tell you what, how about you stay for an extra year and, we'll do something we've never done at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. We'll give you an assigned parking space. I cannot tell you how many people said, really? Really? A parking space? Okay, come on, how much did that cost us? I mean, really, a parking space. You print their name on the floor. Yeah.
Good share story on that. We had a guy at Strategic Command who did Privacy Act and Freedom of Information Act, management stuff. And he kept our legal team out of hot water for years and years and years, tried to retire twice, and they kept incentivizing him. The guy ended up dying in the job.
Dying in the job?
Because they were incentivizing him so incredibly to stay working, they were terrified that he would lose all the knowledge he had.
This is great.
I've got one that's almost that good. Back about 10 years ago, when I was in the IRS Office of Research, there were two guys in the entire IRS who knew how to calculate the DIF score. For those of you who don't know what the DIF score is, it's the algorithm that decides who gets audited.
Oh.
Both of them retired within 2 weeks of each other.
What year was that?
10, 12 years ago. It took 6 months to get somebody else up to speed to be able to calculate the DIF score. And in those 6 months, nobody in the world got their tax returns audited.
That's why I wanted to know when never mind. Thank you. But see, Dr. Young's stories make it real. Okay, let's look at surprise number 6. KM is not considered in mergers or acquisitions. We talked about that. I got a new boss who told me that KM was running itself. The people at British Petroleum, they were told that it wasn't producing any money, so they slashed the budget to 0. And there's, wherever the book is, it's floating around. And yes, I have a few to sell. Zach said I could, so. But this is very interesting. When you see a company buying another company, and then first thing they do is what? They cut the staff size, right? And then because they're trying to cut costs. Well, I don't have a problem with cutting costs, but you have to do it surgically. You don't do it with a hacksaw. And a lot of times they do it with a hacksaw. This one everybody in this room should know. And this was the most amazing to me. I did not expect this one. As we were talking to so many different project managers, Paul and I found that they were talking about the same thing but using different terms. And so at that point, I believe that the British Standards Institute was starting to push along with the Israelis, and I can't remember the Israeli standards people. They were trying to push for the creation of an ISO standard. Does everybody know what ISO is?
ISO 3404.12 for KM.
I beg your pardon?
ISO 3404.12.
No, it's 304 where is it? It just went off. Yeah, I'm going to talk about it in a second. It was published in November of 2018. And where are you? Did he leave? John? John was on the Standards Development Committee. So they actually issued a standard. And as all of you know, standards, how can you possibly write a standard for KM, right? Because it's so dependent on the organization and the culture that you're working in. Well, you know what? They did it. And I think they actually did a good job. So let's talk about it for a second. It started in 2014. They were trying to build a consensus of what good looks like. And for those of you who live in the DC area, you know how difficult it is to write law, right? Or regulations. It's like making sausage. You do not want to watch it happen. There were something like 89 people from around the world working on the developing of the standard. I'm sorry, can you not see? Okay. They issued in October. I'm off by a month. I'm sorry. I actually did a workshop on the standard at the Henley Business School in June of 2018. It hadn't been issued, but I'd seen the draft. And I published another book in 2019. It was published in the UK, and I did 2 chapters on what is an audit, what does it look like, how do you prepare for an audit, and how can you do your own audit in preparation to get an audit if you want to be an audit, but it's not mandatory. The thing that the ISO standard helps you do, first of all, it establishes common language. You might not like the language, but you can now talk to somebody anywhere in the world and you all understand what a word means because it's defined in the definitions. The other thing is, the standard doesn't tell you how to do anything, but it tells you what you must do. And this is not a thing about the standard. There's going to be a talk tomorrow morning. John Coles is going to talk about it. And hopefully he'll go into the detail. And we also did a workshop on auditing at KM World last November, which was a lot of fun because we did a mock audit. Everybody brought parts of their KM program and we just went at it. It was a lot of fun. I'm doing really well on time. I'm going to be able to get them out of here early. Yeah. So audits are scary, right? No. Think of it as like, think of it as a personal trainer. It's like when you go for a physical. Are physicals scary? Well, I don't the needle thing, but it actually gives you a good barometer of how well you're doing. Where can you improve? You don't have to do an audit. You could do your own internal audit by looking at the standard and saying, do we do this? If you want to talk about audits, because I am the only certified ISO 30401 auditor in the world, actually. I did not realize that when I went to do it that I was the first one to do it, but I am. And I am not a consultant. I want to be really clear on that. I am not a consultant. I'm not going to come in and tell you how to fix your program. There's a lot of other people in this room who can do that for you. There are some other things that we found in the book. We found that there are some talents and skills that a good knowledge management program manager should have. And I am just going to step back, and you can't read them, can you? Okay. Wait a minute. All right, the first one is investigate. I'm not going to read the whole paragraph, but you have to take care not to take things at face value. Really look into things. People don't always tell you everything the first time. You have to look into it and verify it. Trust but verify. The next thing is to navigate. The project manager should be able to identify critical knowledge areas and knowledge assets in the organization and keep track of them. And we already know how to do that, right? 2 questions. If I take 2 people out of your organization, who are they and why are they important? Negotiate. You have to get the time and resources needed to run the program. In order to do that, you have to be able to articulate to every level of the organization what's in it for you. What can I do to make it better for you? And then step back and process all that information. It's not easy. Knowledge management is not for the faint of heart. And so many of us just get thrown into it. Where was I? Facilitate. Did we do facilitate? No. Okay. Thank you. Well, you know that. You have to get disparate people to sit down at the same table and decide, yes, we're going to do something that's going to be good for all of us. Because we've already done the homework about what's in it for you and for you and for you, and we're going to do this initiative that'll address all of your needs to a certain degree. Collaborate. I don't think I have to, I don't think I have to go into, well, hello. There we go. I don't think we have to go into collaborate. We all know about that. Communicate. You got to tell the success stories. You got to tell as many of them as you can. Small ones are okay. You just got to keep pointing out that we're making things better. Sometimes we're making things better on a small level. Sometimes we're making things on a big level. $60 million is pretty big. Reducing the time it takes to review a technical problem from 6 months to 4 months isn't as big, but it's noticeable. You keep doing that over and over again, it's going to add up. The next one I really love, curate. This is something where we excel and don't know that we excel. Because we deal with knowledge all across the organization, we can see where what you're doing and what you're doing are related. Like what you were talking about before, Dr. Young. Taking those things and marrying together, making sure people don't make the mistakes that other people have made. And you are the custodian of an organization's knowledge base as knowledge management program managers. You are the fulcrum. But no pressure, okay? And then the last thing is celebrate. That's where you take your success stories and tell people. Posters on the wall, things in the newsletter, give somebody a parking space, something along those lines. So, there are the core skills on one page. The facilitate, collaborate, communicate, and curate, Paul and I really believe are the key. That's the crux of it. If you don't do the other things, it's not quite as bad. But these four is what's going to make or break the program. That's what's going to make you be a success. Well, not only you, but your program. Okay. Questions? And so look at that. I've completely put you all to sleep. No questions? No questions at all? Gee, does that mean we can all go for a cocktail?
We've got one more session, combined rooms, at 4:55.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
How did you become a certified auditor?
Well, I've always wanted to know how things work. So after arguing against the creation of a standard for 3 months, and then finally biting the bullet, and then buying the standard and reading it and thinking, you know, I could do this, I thought, well, you can't audit unless you're a certified ISO auditor. So how do I do that? So I went online and said, how do I do that? The first thing I had to do was to take the ISO lead auditor training class, which was probably the most intensive, most horrible class I've ever been in my life. It started at 7 o'clock in the morning and went till 7 o'clock at night and ran for 6 days. And it had a 5-hour written exam at the end. Yeah, the good news is I've been doing audits for 29 years, so a lot of that stuff I knew, but I just had to put it into ISO context. Okay, so now I'm a lead quality management. I can audit 9001, 2018. But now I wanted to audit knowledge management. So British Standards Institute wouldn't do it. ANSI wouldn't do it. DECRA wouldn't do it. ASQ wouldn't do it. So I started looking for the people who monitored the standards, and I went all the way up to the technical committee chair for the standards, ISO standards, all of the human resources standard, which is where the KM standard falls. And I said to him, do you have any idea how I can get certified? He said, yeah, I can do it. I said, what? He said, yeah, but you're going to be the first one, so we're going to make this really hard. I thought, great. Thank you so much. So there was back and forth about I needed to have references, I needed to show evidence that I'd been doing audits and how my audits had ever been contested, how did I do, how many findings did I have. I had to go back a long way. My educational background, how did I know anything about KM, how could I prove I knew anything about KM, and then he said, okay, fine, I need 5 references who have personal knowledge of your work, both as an auditor and in KM. I'm retired, right? I found some people who were willing to do it, and then after about another month and a half, he said, okay, fine, I'm ready to examine you. So I flew down to Galveston, Texas, on my own dime, and I sat through 16 hours of oral examination, 2 8-hour days. Piece of cake, right? And after a month, he said, what?
He said piece of cake, and I went, what kind of cake?
Yeah. And afterwards, he said, okay, I'll certify you. And I said, and what accreditation authority do you have? After all this, he said, well, and he actually did have the accreditation authority. It was with the University of Texas Medical Branch, who owned the accreditation authority for all of the HR ISO standards. They have since given up that accreditation authority and has now been switched to the ICEE, the International, I can't remember what the C stands for, of Enterprise Engagement. And they now have the accreditation authority. And they have asked me to develop the training for future auditors. So I'm still recovering, but I started working on the outline actually last week. So eventually other people will be able to do it. I don't want to be the only one. I mean, look at this face. Is this face the only auditor you want to see? No.
Is one of the takeaways that prior audit experience is extremely valuable?
Prior audit experience is required. Now, the thing that's been clarified, because I've been negotiating on this, it doesn't have to be ISO auditing experience. So if you've done audits for the IRS, and you can prove that you've done audits for the IRS, and you can come up with people who can vouch for you and who will be served as a reference, that will count. So if you work for, say, an engineering consulting firm and you've audited projects or whatnot, that experience will count. At least 3 years worth, though. Any other questions? Yeah.
Did you observe any meaningful differences between the way that KM is done across size of an organization, so local versus national versus?
Oh, yeah. The smaller organizations would, they don't have a 200-page manual, but they do have a strategy document written in real English. The thing that's interesting is communities practice are very, very, very important. I was going to tell you stories, and I kind of glossed over them. I'm trying to decide which one. Okay, do you want to hear about space or do you want to hear about licorice? Space? Anybody for licorice? No? Okay. I went on a rotation to NASA. We were going to build a nuclear-powered rocket to go to Jupiter to look for water ice on the icy moons. And they canceled the project about 6 months after I got there, but they wanted to keep me on for a variety of reasons. And at the time, they were just canceling the shuttle. They were retiring the shuttle. And they were going to build something that looked amazingly like the Apollo rocket. Does anybody here remember the Apollo rocket? There's like 3 people here who are of the right age. Okay, so the thing about that is when you put the rocket up into space and you have people in it, you have to put a heat shield on it, because if you don't, you fry your astronauts. And astronauts are very expensive commodities. Then we train them for 10 years, and they bring back all this knowledge, and they follow instructions. So to fry them up on the way back is really not a good thing. So you want to have a heat shield. So here we are, we're looking at the Orion spacecraft, which looks amazing. We don't have the Saturn V, but we're going to do something else. Actually, we're probably going to send it up on an Elon Musk thing. But the crew capsule, we need a heat shield. Okay. We did that for Mercury and Gemini and Apollo. Where's the recipe? No one had written down the recipe. If you remember the race to go to the moon, we were working really, really fast. And where you work really, really fast, do you write things down?
It's goat fever.
And was the contract such that they had to write everything down? So, what did they do? They went to the Smithsonian in the dark of night. I like to say the dark of night, but it was really on a weekend. And they found one of those capsules and they cut a piece out and they tried to reverse engineer it. But anybody who's a scientist knows that if you come back through the Earth's atmosphere, you go through such conditions that what you send up is not what you got back. Elements change, electron orbitals change, you don't have what you sent up. So they eventually got something they thought would work. It cost them $1.7 billion, which they did not have. When they reported to Congress what they had done with the money, it was budget time. And what do you think Congress said? You can't remember what you did that was such a success. Why the heck should we give you money? So guess what they did? They cut their budget by guess how much? $1.7 billion. So writing things down is really important. I mean, and the book is full of stories like that. If you need a story to go to your manager and say, look what these dumb people did, let's not do that. There's story after story in there. What else? I don't dance. Well, I do dance, but I have to have a lot of alcohol.
Licorice.
Licorice. Anybody heard of Cadbury?
Yes.
You've heard of Cadbury?
Easter eggs.
Cadbury, this is in Australia, and they love licorice down in Australia. So they make the stuff, and they put the sugar and the starch and put it all together, and they heat it up to 140 degrees, and then it solidifies, and they extrude it, and wonderful stuff. All of a sudden, it wouldn't solidify. But it didn't not solidify all the time. It would not solidify sometimes, but not others. And nobody could figure this out. Well, along comes, and this is why interns are important, along comes an intern, a microbiologist, whom I know, who's a great KMer, actually. He's a really nice guy. He came in and he said, it doesn't solidify at 140 degrees? That's the temperature at which enzymes dissociate. It's got to be an enzyme. Let me do some testing. So to make a long story short, they found that the sugar that they were using to make the licorice, a certain time of the year, harvested in the beginning of the year, when the plant is not mature. When the plant is not mature, it has more starch than sugar in it. So to pull the sugar out of the starch, they would put in an enzyme, which dissociated at 140 degrees. So the sugar became starch, and that's why it didn't solidify. Problem solved. All you got to do now is when you receive the sugar, you say, when was this harvested? We're not taking it. Not doing it. Okay, this was wonderful. About 4 or 5 years, the microbiologist got promoted. He went off to Turkey, I think. And then we were talking about mergers and changes of management. Okay, they decided they were going to upgrade the factory and move it. So they moved the factory and they upgraded it. And they also cut staff. The older people, the people who remembered. Now, nobody ever gets nasty about this, do they? I'm not going to tell you everything I know because you just fired me. They don't do that, do they? How long do you think it took before the licorice stopped getting nice and solid again?
At least one springtime harvest where they accepted the sugar and they had the problem.
Exactly. Now they're losing millions of dollars in this brand new plant. And somebody, and I don't remember who, said, there was this young microbiologist. And so they searched the entire company. They found Arthur in Turkey. And they said, do you remember? He said, oh, yeah, it's an enzyme thing. He said, didn't you guys write that down? I'll tell you one more story. Do I have time? Yeah. Okay. I was working at this nuclear power plant, and I was the young whippersnapper. I was like 28. Didn't know nothing, and I was a lot thinner, and I was sort of cute. I had my hair in pigtails. I mean, I was just obnoxious. And one of the things about this power plant is it was outside of Chicago. It's no longer there. But because it's outside of Chicago, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission imposed certain tests on this plant to make sure that if anything happened, we shut the plant down before we did anything nasty. And we actually put it in the license. In the license, you know, the operating license, the big thing under which you are authorized to operate. So I decided I wanted to see this test. So I get up, you know, my double anti-seize, my full plastics, my respirator suit, and the waterproofs and everything. I'm, you know, walking into containment. It's like, you know, 180 degrees in there, and it's really steamy and everything. And they're going to do this test. And it said, you will trend the leakage past this valve. Now, when I hear trend the leakage, what that says to me is you measure the leakage, you figure out how many drops per minute, and if the number of drops per minute goes up, it's getting bigger. Does this make sense to everybody? Okay, so we go in there, and we're in full plastics and anti-seize, which is not a fun thing to do. And the test engineer comes with a beaker, and he opens the test valve, and the drops are coming out, and then he closes it, and I'm like, where's the stopwatch? And the beaker doesn't have numbers on it, you know, 1 milliliter, 2 milliliters. And then he takes the water and he dumps it down the radioactive waste drain. I'm like, wait a minute. This doesn't look like trending to me. But I didn't say anything because it's really hard to talk in those conditions. You know, you can't really talk. You've got all this stuff on. So we get back outside and we, you know, take your shower and you cool off and everything. And I said, excuse me, but aren't you supposed to trend the leakage? And I swear to God, this is what he said to me. Yeah, but it looked like it was about the same as last time. Okay. All right. So me, being me, and I think you guys are getting a sense of how I am. I went back to those surveillance test records, and I went back to when the plant was licensed. That's like 15 years worth of surveillance tests. I took a look at all the calibration equipment. How often was it calibrated? Was it certified to national standards? How da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Who did it? When did they revise the procedure? I mean, this took like 2 or 3 months. And I was right. And so we went to plant manager, and the plant manager said, hi, how are you? And here I am with my little pigtails, you know, my little tennis shoes. And I said, I think you have a problem, sir. Yeah? Yeah. I think you haven't been doing this test right for the past 3.5 years. And let's see, at $25,000 a day being in violation of the license, that's, he didn't believe me. And of course, I was young, I was female, I was Asian, what did I know? The bottom line is, I was right. $2.5 million later, they tried to get me fired. And I actually wear that as a badge of honor. They did not fire me because I was right and I could prove it. But, I mean, that's another case. I mean, you just read the stuff you're supposed to read. So, but like I said, where's the book? Where's it floating around? Ah, okay. So if you haven't looked at the book, you can look at the book. I have 5 or 6 of them to sell. They, Denise, what do they retail for? Do you know? I think they retail for like $35 or $40.
Around there.
Something like that. I'm selling it for $25, no tax. I don't want to carry them home, but I will. Any other questions? Any more stories? Anybody else want to?
I did want to share one tidbit to your point about who are the most important people and not capturing things on paper. You know, we had to call a guy in Australia or Turkey to get the answer right. The government is facing an impending exodus of knowledge.
Oh, I know.
All of our boomers are about to retire. And their answer to that problem is that they have created a new program called Retired Annuitants. So they can bring you back on.
But only for a certain amount of time.
For a temporary stint to continue to collect your retirement and get a salary so that you can onboard and transfer knowledge to some other human being. Because we haven't done a good job of capturing.
But you know what they don't tell you is how the IRS is going to treat that. Never mind. I don't want to go in there. I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there. But yeah, they've done that.
They haven't determined how they will find the people with that knowledge to bring them back. Yeah, there's a program here, but if the people are in, who knows that knowledge? Because there's no expert locator to say, Joe over there, who retired 2 years ago, we have his contact information to bring it back for this project. that hasn't been done.
This is a recurring problem with the federal government. I know I was a Fed, so.
The guys who knew the gift store, they moved to Israel.
Are they helping Bibi with his financial problems? Okay, thank you so very much. I really appreciate it.